All right, good morning and welcome to the August Technical Committee meeting. Please turn on your cameras during roll call and also for the voting items. This meeting is being recorded. If anyone should experience difficulties during the meeting, please send a message in the chat box. At this time, I'll ask Rebecca to start the roll call to determine member participation. Rebecca?
City of Annapolis,
Present.
thank you. Anne Arundel County. Baltimore City. Baltimore County,
Here.
Carroll County. Harford County,
Harford County's here.
thank you. Howard County,
Here.
Queen Anne's County,
Here.
MDOT,
Here.
MDE,
Here.
MDP,
Present.
thank you. MDOT MTA and MDOT SHA.
Here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rebecca.
One quick second. I'm sorry,
Sure.
Rebecca. Sean Burnett just joined us from Baltimore City.
Okay, thank you for letting me know.
All right, our next item is approval of the minutes from the technical committee meeting in July. Have members had a chance to review the minutes? Can I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Harford County moves to approve the minutes.
Harford County approves. Can I get a second?
MDOT will second that.
Thanks, Dan. We will now vote on approval of the minutes. When your name is read, please indicate aye or nay. Rebecca, please read down the list of members.
Annapolis,
Aye.
Anne Arundel County, Baltimore City.
Aye.
Baltimore County,
Aye.
Carroll County, Harford County,
Aye.
thank you. Howard County,
Aye.
Queen Anne's County,
Aye.
and MDOT.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. The minutes are now approved. The consultant team of ICF, RSG, and Foursquare will share key findings for the work of the Vision Eval modeling and work groups. Zach?
Yes, good morning. This is Zach Kaufman with BMC. I work with the Long Range Transportation Plan, and as you know, the LRTP includes a list of projects that the region anticipates implementing over the next 20 to 25 years, and we do analysis on those projects, but that's essentially just one scenario. And so we wanted to, before embarking on the next LRTP, explore potential policy options and external forces that could impact the region over the next few decades to identify opportunities and risks for the next LRTP. And so we embarked on this Vision Eval modeling framework to do that, and Hannah Twiddell is here from ICF to present some results from that planning process.
Hannah, you're muted.
We're not seeing the full screen yet, Hannah. I think it's in the...
Alrighty, here we go. There we are now. I think.
I think we currently are seeing chat on Teams.
Okay. It should move over to my screen. I'll stop it and start it again. I apologize. I've gotten so used to Teams that I've forgotten how to use Zoom. Alrighty. There we are. Is that a little better?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Good, good. Good, good. So as Zach pointed out, we've been working with him on these and the team on these scenarios in anticipation of the long range plan update getting started. And as he noted, the exploratory scenarios are really an opportunity to take a little time to think about potential different ways of thinking about the planning process, thinking about policy solutions we might want to consider that might not have been considered before or could be considered in different ways. And also to try to take a look at how some future conditions that are difficult to predict could also perhaps have an impact on our decisions and how we move forward. And so the purpose of this whole exercise that we've been engaged in since last fall has been to come to this point where we're talking with you about the findings we've come up with through this process and begin to distill some concepts and ideas that the board and the public could consider during this long range plan update, particularly in terms of potential policy decisions or solutions that you might want to deliberate about and test and discuss further with the travel model and other tools, in addition to the tool that we've been using for this process. I'm not going to dive too deeply into how the tool works. We have a few other resources available for you on that, but we've used a publicly accessible tool just sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration called Vision Eval that enables us to do sort of strategic scenarios of the entire region and sub areas, looking at a whole variety of performance measures, some of which are sort of difficult to or impossible to look at in the travel model, some of which the travel model could take and look at in more depth once we've narrowed down, as we're doing now, some of the key ideas that we want to explore. Some of the performance measures we picked out using the Vision Eval model are showing on your screen here that relate to the goals in the current long-range plan. They're fairly easily understandable to most of the folks in this group in terms of safety and mobility and accessibility and some of the impacts of travel, such as vehicle miles traveled or emissions. We also have sort of developed, in addition to the typical Vision Eval application, some additional calculations to help us understand the differences and impacts among different scenarios between people who, communities that are in what we call lower opportunity areas versus ones that are in higher opportunity areas that have more access to opportunity and community prosperity. This map of lower opportunity areas is probably familiar to some of you. It was developed by BMC for the region. Today, I'm going to just give you the higher level analysis. I'm not going to dive behind the scenes into the nuances of the impacts on different areas, but know that we have that data, and over the coming month as we finalize our report and findings, we'll be able to pull in those nuances on some of the higher priority topics and issues that we're going to be talking about today. In addition, we also put together some information on the impacts that might be anticipated under conditions of flood inundation, so sea level rise plus storm surge, plus sort of continued inland or somewhat inland higher level coastal area flooding situations. Again, we're not going to dive too deeply into that element of the process that we're overlaying as we go along onto the findings that have come out of our vision eval model. We ran a set of scenarios initially during the winter and spring, and did a series of workshops towards the end of May to discuss those findings. That was a very large number of scenarios, almost 1,500 different scenarios that looked at combinations of different inputs for 6 categories of types of influences that can change the trajectory of transportation system performance and other outcomes. We used 3 types of what we call policy levers. These are the sorts of decisions and resources and tools that the public sector and the communities in this region generally have, some jurisdiction over, such as what kinds of transportation networks we invest in, what kinds of land use policies we adopt and programs we adopt to encourage growth that's in a desired fashion. And also what kinds of fees or incentives can be developed to help encourage travel behaviors that we want to see, as well as begin to literally enrich the revenues we have available to us, given that the adequacy of the single gas tax we're using now for almost all of our transportation funds is diminishing as we speak. We also took a look at, in this first round, some influences that future different trajectories of job growth, of transportation technologies such as self-driving cars, and the natural environment might have on the efficacy of those decisions. For the land use scenarios, we specifically put together some inputs that we tested during the first round, and then we tested further in the second round. And the second round is what I'm going to talk to you mostly about today. But I just wanted to show you a quick visual of what those looked like. We put together a scenario, sort of an input in which we had 90,000 additional households in the region above and beyond the number of households that are predicted or forecasted in our current travel model for the year 2050. And then we distributed them in 4 different patterns, those new households around the region. Starting from the left, one pattern was to take those 90,000 new or additional households and cluster them around current transit services and routes. In the second from the second image there, we changed the distribution to cluster them around areas with high densities of jobs. In the third, we clustered them around a mix of both transit and job centers. And in the fourth, we distributed them in the same pattern as the current long-range plan has distributed growth, which is aligned with current land use plan and policy and assumptions. And the reason this is important, I'll tell you in a moment, is because in our second round, we kept going with these assumptions, but also enriched them with some additional transportation investment assumptions. In the initial scenario findings, which we talked about in some workshops in May that I think some of you may have attended, we sort of narrowed down a few key topics that we wanted to examine a little further. We definitely saw some interesting impacts of focusing those additional households near jobs particularly, or near jobs and transit, some combination of that, that had fairly persistent influences on some of the performance measures or outcomes we wanted to accomplish. So we wanted to dive a little deeper into that. We also saw a fairly substantive impact of some of the fees and incentives of single occupant driving particularly, or driving during congestion hours, or parking. Any and all of these fees had increasingly impactful results in terms of the effectiveness of some of the decisions that we could make. The third thing that we noted as a pattern that again has continued through the current round of scenarios is that in many cases, one of the outcomes we were wanting to look for was increasing trip making by bicycling and walking. And many of the solutions do that, but they correlate to higher crash risks, just as increasing the number of vehicles tends to correlate to higher crash risks for cars. So with that sort of straight line assumption of as activity goes up, exposure to crashes goes up, is one of those trends or parallels that we just took into plan process. If we want that outcome, we need to also be proactive and careful about not unintentionally raising crash risks as well. So that involves some policy discussion. The levers that we looked at, the inputs or levers that we looked at in the revised scenarios that we completed in July, much smaller set of about 260 scenarios almost, involved just the policy decisions. We narrowed it down to those kinds of inputs and didn't do another round of the external conditions changing things. We looked at the types of transportation investments we could make, but in this one, we separated out the transit specific investments into their own categories so we could have more flexibility of how we modeled them in the scenario system. And with the transit investments, you can see that the level 0 policies in this model pretty much just reflect the baseline or reference. This is what our long range plan currently has in it. And then these other sort of colored boxes represent different packages of assumptions about changes we could make to those policy decisions. So in terms of the transportation investments on your far left, one type of input, level 1, was increasing our bicycle and walking investments to promote more trip making by those modes. Second level was to use transportation or travel demand management programs such as ride sharing and van pooling, and encouraging companies to promote working from home, remote work for those employees that can do that, with the aim of lessening the number of peak hour commute trips. And the third level of transportation investments was to effectively increase road capacity through a combination of making them more efficient with systems management and operation, TISMO strategies that don't involve widening or changing the physical capacity, and some investments that would involve adding some roadway lanes, adding capacity that way as well. With the transit investments, we came up with a set of inputs that increased the vehicle revenue miles and also the frequency of transit service in targeted ways that mirrored the location distribution that I showed you a minute ago in the land use scenarios. So the transit investments we tested, we matched them up for the purpose of modeling with and without those land use inputs to see if adding transit to the changes in land use patterns in the future might yield some more desired results. And then finally, with the fees and incentives category, we focused in on the ones that were more effective from the first round, which involved options like doubling our current gas tax, instituting a relatively modest fee for vehicle miles traveled. This is for, being charged for the number of miles you drive. A third level where we doubled that fee to see if that intensified the results of different outcomes. And then a fourth one where we layered on other fees on top of that vehicle miles traveled fee, such as a congestion fee during urban peak hour travel and additional parking fees. So we went through a sort of a 5-step process of slowly layering up and testing each of those types of policy inputs together with and without one another, and getting ourselves to the point where we could narrow down sort of the high impact policy decisions and investments in each of those steps, and then finally take the subset that were the most impactful and take a look at how application of different types of fees might change that performance. And we took a look at outputs such as accessibility to jobs by transit or bike and walking or car, looking at costs, travel costs for transportation and housing, primarily for travel, trip making, just numbers of transit bike ped trips and vehicle trips, crashes, same by mode, the vehicle miles traveled, and then the associated emissions and delay that typically parallel with VMT, but not always. Sometimes they change as you use different mitigations. I'm going to do a very high level summary of what we found in those 5 steps, and then open up the floor for just some conversation and discussion about insights that we've been pulling from that analysis. We can share with you an online tool for looking at these results yourself. And I also have, as a back pocket in the slide deck, some of the data in charts and tables if we wanted to look at any of those. In the first step, we looked at, again, those different transportation investments in those first 2 levels, transportation, bike walk, TDM, TSMO, the roadway capacity. And in that second column, what's on that chart, transit investments, different kinds of raising of transit in different locations. And out of those different types of investments, the ones that were consistently the most impactful were the TDM policies that involve particularly increasing the amount of working from home, that typically had the strongest influence on the outcomes we wanted to see, and also mitigated many of the, not all, but many of the undesirable outcomes that sometimes can go along with that. The transit investments we looked at had a very strong influence in general on increasing transit and walk trips, and reducing travel costs and vehicle crashes and the other things that go along with vehicle miles, increasing car travel. And it sort of didn't matter where you put them for the purpose of this first step. So we wanted to look in a little deeper. How about if we just combine those 2 most powerful policies types and then look at them along the different types of transportation investment patterns. And generally, when you put those 2 together, we got a better result in terms of particularly reducing the cost of travel. We got higher transit and walk trip making. We got slightly lower bicycle trip making, which in our model tends to correlate with increased transit trips within a certain window of distance. Transit and bicycle commuting or travel sort of tends to compete a little bit. So sometimes as you increase transit trips, you will sometimes see a change in bike trips and vice versa. And those policies combined also had a more powerful impact than by themselves on decreasing vehicle miles traveled and all of the undesired things that tend to go along with that, like emissions and travel delay and car crashes. Then we took a look at land use growth. So remember, we were adding those additional households. We added them by themselves without transit first, and took a look at, what's the most impactful. And pretty much as we found before, again, clustering that additional growth around jobs or around a mix of jobs and transit. And this is without increasing the transit. And it all by itself to change some of the job access to jobs, particularly by biking and walking, and transit trips and so forth. And it had a lesser impact on increasing things like vehicle miles traveled. Just the fact of adding 90,000 households is going to increase everything, all the kinds of travel. So you can't, generally, you're not going to see a scenario where that doesn't happen, but what we're trying to do here is at least mitigate some of the less desirable kinds of travel with the way we organize our residential growth. And then once we increased the transit within those scenarios, and took a look at how much more benefit we might get out of adding transit to, for example, clustering growth around jobs. We did find that there were some nuanced impacts that were helpful to see. So, for example, it mitigates some of the increased cost of travel that tends to happen with more population and more households. And it helped to further reduce things like vehicle crashes and so forth. So the additional transit added some benefit to that growth pattern. So then let's put together all the things that we're starting to see that are more impactful and test them again with those alternative transportation investments. What would happen if we took those impactful growth plus transit options and added some other types of transportation investments, right? Bicycle and pedestrian investments, TDM policies, or new road capacity. What might that do to the higher performing scenarios? And we did find that the transportation demand management and work from home policies, again, tended to contribute the most to the desired outcomes there, particularly in terms of costs. We finally got a scenario where the costs of travel dropped a small amount, but they dropped. This was the only policy that didn't continue to have a cost increase associated with it. And we got some nice increases in our alternatives to driving trips, as well as driving trips, decreases in driving trips. Again, that was the only policy that reduced VMT as opposed to just mitigating the increase. So those were some important things that we found. Interestingly, the increased road capacity option did have a slightly better impact on emissions. We do think that's probably largely due to the higher efficiency, so a little bit less traffic sitting and idling under some of the scenarios that don't include more system efficiency improvements and capacity. So I think that had a lot to do with why that one did bump up a little bit better in the emissions category, but not a lot better than the TDM scenario did. And finally, the last step, we took a look at how laying on different imposition of new fees and taxes might change those outcomes. We found that the lower level impacts, a higher gas tax or a fairly low-ish vehicle miles travel fee, generally didn't change those outcomes of that high-performing set of scenarios very much. But when we bumped up that vehicle miles traveled fee just by itself to 5 cents, we began to see a nice result, particularly in terms of reducing vehicle crashes, VMT, and delay. And we did see a little bit of improvement in job access and some increase of costs, obviously. And then finally, when we layered on additional fees to that 5 cent VMT fee, congestion fee during urban rush hour, and parking rates downtown in urban centers going up, we found that we were able to see a rise in transit trips, bike, ped trips, further reductions in vehicle crashes and VMT and emissions. And of course, the costs go up. So the multiple fee addition generally sort of bumped everything up or down accordingly by about a percentage point across the board. So the highest sort of policy combinations, putting them all together, tended to see that this job-focused distribution of housing, even with or without additional transit or fees, did have a real impact on access to jobs and trip making that we wanted to see. In terms of costs of travel, the VMT fee by itself obviously was a slightly less impact than multiple fee scenario. And since the VMT fee had sort of the lion's share of the change that we wanted to see, That seemed to be something to start with in terms of talking about potential fees as having in and of itself just a reasonably substantive impact. With trip making and bike ped crashes, as we were saying earlier, as one goes up, the other tends to go up. So that was something to remember to take into account as we explore further some of these types of investments, like locating growth near jobs or near jobs in transit, that's going to hopefully boost those kinds of trip making, but also those crash rates, as well as the further impact you get on those kinds of trips from imposing fees that make driving more expensive. And finally, vehicle crashes, things that tend to reduce VMT, tend to reduce vehicle crashes. Again, there's some mitigations we could consider there for any kinds of scenarios or futures where we see VMT increasing, such as with additional growth that's almost always going to generate some increase. We might want to be also looking strategically at locations where we could be making safety countermeasures for vehicle travel as well as bike and ped travel. So some food for thought around transportation investments. How can we do some more aggressive strategies to promote work from home for some types of jobs while advancing traditional sort of commute travel options for other types of jobs that involve physical travel? If we do that sort of, as I said, improving the capacity by improving TSMO and lanes, that gets you a lot of benefit in terms of reducing delay and emissions while you're still increasing VMT. There is some concern, though, thinking further along, that often, particularly advancing roadway capacity and making it faster and easier to travel by car tends to make the car more attractive, and you wind up with induced travel. So food for thought about if we want to make that kind of investment, we want to think about avoiding inducing more travel and kind of, diluting the impact of that investment. And thirdly, we found it really interesting that expanding transit around jobs had such a strong impact, and locating housing around jobs had such a strong impact on many of the things we wanted to do. One thing we did see, though, was that in many of those locations that are close to jobs, they also tend to be where higher income households tend to live. And so that may have diluted some of the benefit of putting transit there. We might get better results in terms of boosting transit ridership and reducing VMT if we pinpoint locations of growth and transit investments in and around locations that have a different mix of income levels. In terms of land use, again, thinking about adding houses tends to raise all kinds of trips. What are some safety countermeasures we can think about as trip making goes up by different modes? And again, locating housing near jobs or jobs in transit definitely has a lot of impacts. But do we want to be nuanced about where we put those as we're adjusting our priorities in terms of allocating growth? Should we really be intentional about using transit accessible locations that also correlate to a greater mix of incomes in order to be even more effective? And finally, with fees, we saw that just having a single VMT fee at a price point of about 5 cents was a very effective thing. This would be a new important decision here in this region. So lots of thought would need to be put into it. One particular thought, amongst other things in terms of logistics, would be to think about policy strategies that go along with that kind of fee to lessen the sort of disproportionate burden of that kind of fee that can occur on at least some lower income households that still have to drive because transit's not an option for them. And then finally, just some other questions or food for thought of just, we'd be curious to hear your feedback either today or after the meeting about any findings that seem surprising or data you want us to look into further, and whether you feel that some of the ideas we've put forth are helpful or most helpful to carry forward into the long-range planning discussion. So I will, I'll leave that there. Open the floor to the level I can with questions or comments at this point. People can put things in the chat as well, or contact Zach after the meeting.
Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah, that was a lot for everyone to absorb. We will send the PowerPoint, and as Hannah mentioned, after this slide now, there are additional slides with a lot of data, so you can kind of sit with it, look at it. We would like feedback, if not today, shortly after, so that it really does inform the direction we take and what it is we present to the board later in the month. So I did see Sam had a question. Can someone address his question in the chat?
Hey, Regina, you're referencing my message. I was just having issues with the connection. Although
Oh, you asked, yeah, sorry.
I do actually, though, I do have a question now regarding this presentation. If it's okay to ask, if I miss my chance, it's okay too.
Go ahead. That actually it was Sean in the chat, but let's go
Oh,
ahead
I'm
with
sorry.
your
Well,
question. No, go ahead with your question first, Sam, and then we'll
Sure.
go to Sean.
Okay, I appreciate it. So in the scenarios and the models and everything, Hannah, how this is working, specifically focusing on the discussion there at the end about VMT, 5-cent VMT. Was the model, the assumptions you use factoring in the current fee structure in Maryland? We just had a lot, some pretty major fee increases that passed at the state level for vehicle registration fees, $5 per tire tax, a lot of changes. Were those the updated existing fees factored in when you were reviewing this, or does that not really affect how your model works?
That's a really great point, Sam. I was thinking the same thing just recently because I was up there and took a Lyft trip and happened to notice on my receipt the little fee, right, for using Lyft and Uber, right? So we had a fairly simple set of assumptions for this first round of modeling where it was the current gas tax, and that was pretty much it. So it was sort of virgin, if you will. And I think it's a great idea to think about as we're moving into the long range plan to do more nuanced modeling, especially given these recent, fees, to see how those might change that interplay of effects. I mean, my sense is probably it just boosts everything if it plays out, but you really have to. It might, for example, make a lower VMT fee more effective.
And
we have other ones now that are also adding to the mix anyway.
Yeah, and that's the reason I asked, is because the fee, at least in my opinion, the fee changes that happened at the state level were not insignificant. Vehicle registration, a lot of different things when they all add up. I was just concerned that might or should be factored in at some point. I recognize maybe not quite at this, I know that affects, you were looking at desired outcomes versus increasing cost. So I just thought I would mention that, and I appreciate it. Thank you for the presentation and for taking my question.
Thank you. Sean, you had a thought?
I think my question got answered in the chat. Yeah, I mean, I was just interested because you said that it raised crash rates, but the language was broad, so I wanted to make sure that it was multimodal only. And then it sounds like that determination is primarily based off of the factor that when you increase any mode, you increase correlative crashes. It doesn't sound like, or maybe correct me if I'm wrong, have you guys looked at that like as a per trip? Like has any kind of statistical ratio work been done in regards to that, to see if this is something that just because I'm curious if I mean, it's in theory, right? You move people out of their cars into other modes. You would think maybe one of those modes would get safer, but I don't know.
John, do you want to address that? I have John Slayton on the line from Resource Systems Group, who has a lot of the brains inside of this model. And I thought your answer in the chat was pretty interesting. If you want to just take a minute to.
Well, I think we're applying the model. Thanks, Hannah, for the credit. But we didn't create the model. But the application, I think, if Sean saw in my response there, the rate or the incident, let's just call it that, because it accounts for serious injuries and fatalities. So the incident is a rate that we've held constant across both today. So we built a model that represented today's conditions, but also it went out to the future year. And that crash incident rate was held constant. And so we did play off the scenarios where if we get a bunch of people out of their cars and instead walking and biking, we see the crashes or the incidents for the vehicles reduce, but the increase in some of the active travel crashes went up. Now, that could happen, or we could actually see some of the crash rates go down. So the incident per user, maybe in the future in the active travel sense, may actually go down because there's the safety in numbers phenomena, or we make some investments in our infrastructure. So those two opportunities to reduce that incident rate was not accounted for in the model. And that's very much why we're bringing it up and why the conversation today is to say, hey, look, if we keep our current infrastructure as it looks like today, and we get a bunch more people walking and biking, we may have some disbenefits from that. So hopefully that helps, Sean.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep.
Cindy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Cindy Burgess, safety planner at BMC, and I just had a question. You were talking a little bit, Hannah, about the interplay between transit and bike trips, and you have more transit, you might have fewer bike trips. Is there a way to incorporate those that bike to transit so it's kind of a combo trip?
I think it accounts for that, but John, correct me if I'm wrong.
This is a model that estimates daily travel, and it's not a tour-based model like the activity-based insight tool that is used. So at a high level, the rate of biking and transit and walking and vehicles, they're all independently modeled, even though there's interaction terms. And so it does not specifically account for who bikes to transit. But if you have a certain level of transit accessible to you, there is a general correlation that as transit becomes more frequent and if the cost is right, people will not take that 3-mile bike trip. They'll hop on the bus. And so that's where that general, as Hannah said, if we increase frequency of transit and make it more accessible, there's a general decline in the biking rates. All other things held constant.
It's something we could
Thank
think
you.
about if we're using the travel model, which is the insight travel model that is much more location specific, right? And you can look at specific discrete segments along a quote tour, right, of a trip. That may be where we can be exploring, some of the nuances where a trip is a combination of biking and transit, for example. So, you're not seeing that, substitution effect in the same way. So
Okay. I know it's very granular, so it's
yeah,
probably
exactly.
difficult,
So
but
that's a good application, or that's a good concept to work into the more detailed modeling that you'll be doing in the long range plan.
thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. I'm going to turn it back to you, Angie, and just encourage members to share questions and ideas related to this. So it will be more useful when we come back to it next month and the following month.
All right, thank you. Our next presentation will be with Mr. Tim Briggs of BMC, and he will share a report about what defines intercity bus service, who are some of the providers and their routes, as well as the use of FTA Section 5311 funding. Tim?
Great. I just put in, okay. Oops. Okay, good morning. I'm here to present on the topic of intercity bus service with an overview of the network and facilities in the Baltimore region.
Tim, I apologize for interrupting you, but can you show your presentation in a full slide mode?
Okay, yeah, I was trying to do the presenter mode so I could see my notes, but I guess it's not integrated with Teams.
Tim, you just need to share your other screen.
Yeah, or you could just share the application and not the screen, and it would show the presenter mode.
You're in two screens and you're sharing the one you don't want to share.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Makes me feel better that somebody else has the same issue I did. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So does this advance the slide?
Yes, it does.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for those that helped out with that. So why intercity bus? As a transit planner, this hadn't come across my plate before. So doing a little digging, I just want to share that planning for intercity buses and facilities, it's embedded in the regulations that define the role of the MPO. So that's a little bit why I'm talking about this today. I'll start with the definition of what intercity bus service is. So like all transit, it follows a regular schedule and operates over a fixed route. However, it has some similarities and differences to other transit services. Intercity bus connects two or more urbanized areas. So like a commuter bus may look like an intercity bus, but typically connects like a suburban area to an urban area versus two urban areas. It has capacity for transporting baggage carried by passengers, not typically common of your regular bus service, whether it's local or commuter. And it may make connections to bus service to more distant points. And I'll talk about that as I talk about the network a little bit more. Most intercity bus service in this country is provided by private providers. It's kind of been a fluctuating marketplace, especially as with all kind of transportation modes, changes with COVID. But there are kind of some different categories of providers, and the first are sort of the legacy carriers. This is kind of what we might traditionally think of when we think of an intercity bus. It makes intermediate stops at both urbanized and non-urbanized locations on many routes. They typically do pick up and drop off out of a terminal. Baltimore has a downtown bus station, and there's a photo of that on the right. And there's an availability to do what's called interline ticketing to make connecting bus services. So while there technically isn't a route from Baltimore to Las Vegas through a provider like Greyhound, you could make that you could take that trip with a number of different connections. A couple of the major legacy carriers are Flixbus, which purchased Greyhound a couple years ago. They still use the Greyhound brand for sort of the national network of interconnecting routes. And they use the FlixBus brand for more like local travel, heavily corridored travels in like more major metropolitan areas. So for example, in Baltimore to New York might be a service that you would take on the FlixBus, whereas a trip to Chicago or points further west would be on the Greyhound bus. There's also a category called curbside buses. So these generally serve larger population centers or major universities and really don't stop in rural areas. They operate express schedules with no more than 1 or 2 stops en route. Previously, Megabus was a large operator. I took a Megabus many times to go to New York. You know, typically it would start in DC, it would come over to Baltimore, pick up some passengers, and then go straight to New York. And, you know, because it's really focused more on that end-to-end or point-to-point service, the schedules aren't really designed to facilitate any connections to other intercity carriers. And also the destinations and the schedules can sometimes fluctuate throughout the year. There's a solid market of you know, travel for college students around holidays and things like that. And so there might be more intense service around Thanksgiving, spring break, etc. In Maryland, we have some shuttle or feeder services. These are local routes that connect the rural areas to the intercity travel network. So in the Baltimore region, we have, you know, a bus terminal. We have the Penn Station and BWI rail station, and as well as the airport. And so there's a route that goes from Western Maryland to Baltimore City to Baltimore, and then from the Eastern Shore to Baltimore. And typically these services have interline ticketing, so you can go on the Greyhound site and buy a ticket to Frederick, and you'll travel. Or if you're traveling from Frederick, you know, the first part of that leg will be on the Bay Runner, and then you'll transfer to another service. Other states such as Virginia and Colorado have expanded their intrastate service in recent years. We haven't seen any recent service changes in Maryland, and I'll talk a little bit more about why as part of a discussion of a recent service assessment done by MDOT-MTA. So putting that all together, here's a map done by our GIS folks, kind of showing some of the network in beyond Baltimore and beyond. So we have the legacy carriers that are going north to Boston, south to Atlanta and Orlando, and west to Chicago with connections to further destinations. We have our curbside buses that are sort of mirroring that service, especially along the I-95 corridor, going up to New York especially, as well as serving college towns like Ithaca, Albany, Blacksburg, and smaller cities in the south. And then we have our shuttle services that connect the western and eastern parts of the state to the central network. Just a few things about intercity bus travel in general. So the ridership is projected to grow 4% in 2025, and that's faster than airline or automobile. Intercity bus carried about 50 million passengers in 2023. For reference, intercity rail carried about 30 million, domestic air travel carried 800 million, and auto travel was 1.9 billion. So obviously a smaller segment of the market, but you know, if there is more service and we can generate more ridership, you know, that could bring about less congestion and fewer emissions and things like that that we're, you know, trying to achieve as a region. As I mentioned previously, Flix purchased Greyhound, and they are expanding their service in the Northeast, or have expanded their service in the Northeast. So we might see additional service in the Baltimore region. But one challenge in the current operating market is that the rural and secondary routes have seen less recovery, and possibly due to the loss of some of the traditional bus stations. In addition to private intercity bus service, the FTA recognizes the importance of intercity buses to the transportation network, and sets aside specific funding for operations as well as capital investment. So those are called 5311 funds, and in Maryland, they are administered by the MDOT MTA Office of Local Transit Support. So the goal is to advance, better connection of rural areas, and through a grant process, 2 providers were chosen to provide service within Maryland. So the first state-supported route, I sort of mentioned it earlier, is from Western Maryland in Grantsville to Baltimore. There are 2 daily round trips. This is operated by the Bay Runner Shuttle, and they receive operating assistance as well as capital assistance for marketing and the purchase of an accessible van. In FY25 and FY26, they receive $1.4 million. The other state-supported route is in Central Maryland. This one's operated by Greyhound. It runs along the Route 40 corridor between DC and Wilmington, and Greyhound receives about $600,000 in operating assistance for this particular route. Here's a closer view of Maryland and kind of highlighting those intercity routes and how they fit into the network. A couple other things to kind of keep in mind when looking at this map from a statewide perspective, there really isn't any intercity service in Southern Maryland. And there's also not connections from DC to Western Maryland or the Eastern Shore. So that's something that was kind of considered and also talked about in a recent study by the MTA. So in 2022, MTA assessed its current program and developed some recommendations. The program, I think, was initiated in the mid-2000s and largely been operating as it was defined. A grant program for funding service in the 2 corridors that are identified as priorities. And the 2022 study gathered data and looked at best practices to make recommendations for the future intercity bus network. The plan was completed during COVID. And so one of the priorities was just maintaining existing service, especially the connection from Baltimore to the Eastern Shore. Looking at travel schedules, that's still in place. It's not currently receiving any state support. So I think overall that's a good thing. There was also a recommendation to interline some MTA commuter bus routes in Southern Maryland with Greyhound to allow passengers to make connections at Union Station. So essentially, the commuter bus would operate as like a feeder service into the network, similar to how Bay Runner does for other routes. And then there was sort of a visionary plan for some expansions, and those were considered in Western Maryland to DC, Eastern Shore to DC, and then in the Baltimore, Parkton, York, PA corridor. But those expansions would require funding beyond what's currently available. So they were kind of more of a longer term option. And there really haven't been any other changes to the program or to the state supported service since the report was completed. So we're kind of similar to what I shared earlier is the latest. So that was an overview of the services. We can also look at intercity bus facilities in the Baltimore region, and I worked with our GIS team to identify and map the stops in the Baltimore region. One thing that we see is kind of clustered around Baltimore. There are a lot of stops. So there's Columbia, Pikesville, Towson, White Marsh, Southeast Baltimore, downtown, Penn Station. And kind of the conclusion that I drew from that is that each of the private providers is really trying to capture a specific market. If you live in a certain part of town, and specifically with travel to New York, being a big driver of demand, you maybe don't want to go over to White Marsh if you're on the west side of Baltimore. And so there is a service that exists out of Pikesville. And I think that makes it a little bit difficult to kind of coordinate some of the facilities because even two different providers. It's kind of hard to see on the map, but they use a different location in White Marsh. One of them uses the park and ride, and the other uses a location that's closer to the mall. So they're kind of each trying to carve out their own space and find their own customers. But there are some planning considerations that I wanted to share for this group as you consider items in the TIP and the long range transportation plan. So the first is just around travel lanes. Intercity bus is concentrated in the I-95 corridor. So any additional HOV or toll lanes that would enable the buses to move more fluidly between their destinations would be a huge advantage. In terms of facilities, the downtown bus station was built in 2016, but business is really kind of moving away from those legacy carriers. And as I discussed previously, there's not really another significant concentration of stops or services in the region. So having another facility seems kind of impractical. However, 4 of the intercity stops in the region are at designated park and ride, and 2 are at MARC stations. So any improvements to the lighting, shelter, and seating at these stations would benefit intercity bus travelers. In terms of service coordination, 11 of the 17 intercity stops have a transit connection within a 2-mile walk. That's very close. And 16 of the 17 stations have a connection within a 5-mile walk. The only station without a transit connection is on Kent Island. And then new services, as I mentioned, there haven't been any new services. Local public transit operators are eligible to apply for the federal funding for feeder service. It needs to be at least 35 miles in length to intercity bus routes. So, the Baltimore region is pretty big. That does create a possibility. However, it can be tricky to find the demand for the intercity service, and especially considering that there are very limited numbers of round trips, 1, possibly 2 a day. So there may not be enough ridership to justify kind of the investment that you need to make in buses and things like that. So if there are any further questions or comments, I'd be happy to take them now. You can also follow up with me after the present or offline. So I'll turn it over to Regina.
Thank you, but I'm just going to go ahead and hand it back to Angie, although is there a question? Sean, you had a question. Was that the prior presentation about volume or ratio, or is that this presentation?
It was the prior presentation.
Okay, because I see John answered. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Tim? All right, thank you, Tim. Appreciate the material you shared with us this morning.
All right, next we'll have Mr. Darren Bean of SHA, and he will update the technical committee on the schedule for the coming updates to the functional classification of roadways. Darren?
Darren, are you presenting, or do you want me to pull up the slides?
Can you pull up the slides for me?
I sure can. Just give me a second here.
Yes.
All right. I believe this is all set for you, Darren.
All right, thank you, Regina. I'm Darren Bean from State Highways Regional Intermodal Planning Division, Functional Planning Program. I did try to turn my camera on, but I'm not sure why it's not working for me right now. But I will be going over State Highway schedule and process to review and update the functional classification system for the state of Maryland. Can you go to the next slide? So every 10 years when the U.S. Census Bureau released a census urban areas as part of their 10-year decennial census process. FHWA first directs the state DOTs to review the census urban areas and provide any adjustments in coordination with local planning partners. And once we get those adjustments to FHWA and they review and approve them, they then direct the state DOTs to review their functional classification system in coordination with local planning partners to review and provide any potential updates to the functional class system in conjunction with changes in the urban areas. And SHA's Regional Intermodal Planning Division is planning to meet with most of the counties tomorrow to provide them with information and guidance on the process to review their own functional class system within their counties to see if they have any potential updates based on any changes within their census urban areas. Next slide, please. So the reason that we reviewed the functional classification system is because it helps Federal Highway with their highway performance monitoring system. This is a report that they work with the US DOT and the United States Congress to pretty much determine how the highway system is performing. They collect different data such as AADT, annual average daily traffic, pavement data, the type of facility, speed limits, curb and grave data. Then it also helps them with their federal funding program. In the table on the right, there are 7 different classifications that a roadway can be assigned to, but specifically minor collectors changes federal aid eligibility based on their designations. So minor collectors designated in urban areas are eligible for federal aid, but minor collectors in rural areas are not eligible. And the last piece that this process helps is with roadway designs. The functional classification of a road can help determine the design features of a specific roadway. Can you go to the next slide, please? And so far as our schedule, the urban area boundaries for Maryland was improved by FHWA in January. In April, the Data Services Division fixed any minor adjustment issues that FHWA found. And then from April up until July, the Regional Intermodal Planning Division was kind of just doing a preliminary analysis on any potential candidates that can be updated as far as their functional classification roles. We specifically did this for roads owned by the state of Maryland. And tomorrow would be the kickoff meeting for the local counties and local planning partners to begin learning about the process and how they can review their own roadways for any potential updates. We do anticipate this to be at least 8-month process. Excuse me, at least a year for the local counties to review their own roadways, and followed by that will be MPO approvals. And then once we get sign off from MPOs and the local counties, it can go to FHWA for their review and approval. Next slide, please. And the last thing I want to mention is that we do have to account for the mileage of each functional classification. FHWA does sets the standards of how much mileage can be dedicated to each functional class. And our data services division also have data collected for that throughout the state of Maryland, as well as for each county as well. Next slide, please. And so with that, is there any questions?
Thank you, Darren. We'll now move on to Ms. Eileen Singleton from BMC, who will share information about the process to update bridge and pavement targets. Eileen?
Good morning, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. So hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. So thanks for having me here, and I'm going to give an update on the update on the Transportation Asset Management Plan that MDOT kicked off that process last week. And there are a couple of BMC staff members who are participating. Myself, as well as Victor Henry, attended that meeting. And there are also, in addition to state staff, there was local staff, and MDOT mentioned that they're interested in including more local staff in this process. So if anyone is interested, there's some contacts at the end if you're interested in being more involved. In the past, the bridge and pavement folks have typically been involved, but MDOT staff, SHA staff noted that if there are folks from other departments who are interested in being involved, they would like that. So I have a few slides that I selected to just give you an update on the process. So if you're not familiar, the Transportation Asset Management Plan is a requirement for state DOTs. It was came out of MAP 21 and the FAST Act, and it is for states to develop a risk-based asset management plan focusing on bridge and pavement, which is the requirement, and also looking at finances and trying to be efficient in using your funding to be cost effective. So the TAMP covers the national highway system for the state, regardless of who owns the system. So as you can see, most of the bridge and pavement are owned by the state, but there are also some portions owned by local and federal agencies. And so all the agencies are involved in the TAMP, although the state is the one that is responsible. And the state also collects the data used as part of the TAMP. And the TAMP is updated every 4 years. So this is just a quick shot from the MDOT Open Data Portal showing the NHS bridges and roads in the region, just to give you an overview. And I couldn't find a map that shows the ownership. Most of it is, like I noted, is state owned, but there is some local and a little bit federal owned in the region. So the TAMP has certain requirements that need to be included. Again, it's a 4-year document. The first one I think was done in 2019. There was an update in 2022, and then this one will be the 2026 update. And it includes an inventory of the assets and the current conditions. This is where 2-year and 4-year targets are developed, which are used to review every year. They're reviewed, as well as developing a 10-year target. There's a life cycle analysis, risk management plan, financial plan, and investment strategies that the state develops. well, with input from the other owner agencies. And each year there's a consistency review looking at the targets to see how things are going. So again, this is the table of contents from the 2022 TAMP. And this is the schedule for the update of the 2026 TAMP. So engage MDOT and partner stakeholders that started. And so as the TAMP development is in process, and that will be the draft done in August of next year, with review and hopefully final approval in December of 26. This consistency report is what the state will also be looking at the condition of the bridges and pavement each year compared to the 2- and 4-year targets, and seeing how things are going. And so the state develops its 2- and 4-year targets, and then you all may remember, then the region develops our 2- and 4-year targets based off the state. We could accept the state, or we can develop our own. And in the last few years, we have developed our own for some of the measures, accounting for the general condition in our region versus the state. So that in the region, the MPO, we don't have any. There's no requirement to have a TAMP. It's the state has the TAMP, but we participate, and that makes it a more robust and well-informed document. And again, and the locals participate as well. So if anyone has any questions about the TAMP, I would definitely recommend that you contact JP or Meredith from the state asset management office. They call it AMO, right? SHA. And you can try me with questions, but if and I'll do my best, but JP and Meredith would be the ones with more of the specifics. And if you're interested in getting involved in the process, follow up with them.
Thank you, Eileen. Now we'll have Mr. Briggs share information about the update of the Maryland Coordinated Human Service Transportation Plan for the Baltimore region. Tim?
All right, I get a second try on the technology, so hopefully this goes a little more smoothly. So this is a brief update on the upcoming update to the Baltimore region's Coordinated Human Service Transportation Plan. So the program, FTA has a program that's called the Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities. It's better known as Section 5310. And they require that projects funded under that program be included in a local plan that is updated on a regular basis. So the planning process is underway, and it will come to the technical committee and the BRTB for approval. Earlier versions of the plan were produced in 2007, 2010, 2015, and 2019. So if you were around at the BRTB at that time, perhaps you remember that. More recently, the technical committee and BRTB endorsed applications for the most recent funding cycle for Section 5310, and that was in December of 2024. So perhaps that rings a bell. So the focus of the plan is improved mobility for specialized groups. Some elements of the plan include an assessment of existing transportation services, as well as the needs, developing strategies and other activities to address those needs, and then coming up with the priorities for carrying out the recommendations of the plan. So BMC is working with MDOT MTA to coordinate the stakeholder outreach for the plan. There will be 2 outreach sessions, one in September and one in November, to gather feedback on elements of the plan. In each window, there'll be 2 options. There'll be an in-person session and a separate virtual session. So really trying to make sure that folks are available and having the right, having really catching a lot of people, through the virtual, but also having time for that in-person interaction. September is going to be about the needs, and the second session will be about the strategies. So we'd like tech committee members to consider possible attendees from their jurisdiction, or to share recommendations from their local agencies or elected officials, just as we consider the opportunities to give feedback. So if you do have a question, I think this is more just kind of an informational item to let you know about some current work that's ongoing, and to make sure that you're aware of the opportunity to provide feedback on behalf of your jurisdiction, as well as to connect interested individuals to the planning process.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Part of the reason we wanted all of you to hear about this is typically the stakeholders that participate are the nonprofits that apply for grant under the 5310 program. And to me, it always seemed a little strange that the program applicants write the plan. So we wanted to make sure that if anybody in your jurisdiction, it could be in the Department of Aging, could be in transit, we'd be happy to put their names on the list so that they can participate. And it's been a number of years, but in the past, when individual applications have come before the board for funding, some of the members have said, oh, our executive has been hearing a lot about this or this. So this is just an early opportunity for you all to see if there's anyone in your domain that you think should participate, so they have a voice before this is put together and then the plan comes before you for approval. So it really is kind of a heads up, and if there's has anything to contribute, this is a great chance.
All right, thank you, Regina and Tim. Next, we'll have Mr. Kaufman, and he will begin ongoing discussions about the 2027 Long Range Transportation Plan. Zach?
All good with the presentation? Is everyone seeing that? Okay. So, as Angie said, I'll be providing an introduction to the 2027 LRTP, noting that we purchased the domain name Region Next as an evergreen term for the Long Range Transportation Plan, and plan to use that in future iterations of the plan, including this upcoming one. So the horizon year for the LRTP upcoming is 2055. So the next LRTP would be Region Next 2055. I think most of you are familiar with the Long Range Transportation Plan, but in case there are some new folks here, it addresses at least a 20-year planning horizon beyond the timeframe covered by the TIP by federal regulation. So if the TIP goes from 2026 to 2029, then the Long Range Plan would have to cover at least through 2050, or rather 2049, but we usually go in 5-year increments. It's updated every 4 years in air quality non-attainment areas, which the Baltimore region is for ozone. Otherwise, it can be updated every 5 years. It has to be constrained by the amount of revenue anticipated to be available to the region, as well as adhere to all air quality conformity requirements. And the core of the plan really is a list
of all planned federally funded expansion and large-scale system preservation projects, as well as their estimated costs and their anticipated revenues that are going to be available to support those projects. It also provides kind of a transportation vision for the region through adopted goals and strategies, and details socioeconomic, environmental, technological, and other factors that are likely to impact the transportation system over the next 20 to 25 years. So I'll go kind of into more detail with each of these steps, but just providing a broad timeline for the next LRTP. We are currently working on, and you've seen presentations regarding the scenario planning and needs assessment projects. They're kind of wrapping up. The Cooperative Forecasting Group is currently working on developing forecasts for households, population, and employment. For the upcoming LRTP, we will then review those and anticipate adoption mid next year. We'll have public involvement activities throughout. We're kind of refining what form that might take. We did white papers for the last LRTP, so we may update those, do newsletters, whatever. But it's a long process, so it's difficult to keep people engaged throughout every step of the process. So we want some activities along the way to keep people and their eyes on the LRTP. The next key step is the goals and strategies, kind of embarking on that now through the fall. Also, financial forecasting and project scoring will be going on kind of at the same time in fall into winter of 2026. Kind of the key here is the submittal and scoring of candidate projects, as well as development of the preferred alternative in mid to late 2026, followed by analysis of the preferred alternative, public comment period on the draft, and adoption anticipated in July of 2027. So for the goals and strategies, just a reminder of what the goal areas are. These generally stay consistent based on federal planning factors from one plan to the next, but we do refine the strategies associated with each goal area for the plan. So there are a number of strategies associated with improving accessibility, for example, that can kind of point towards how we can, what kinds of activities we can engage in to improve accessibility. And so on and so forth. Others are increased mobility, improving system safety, infrastructure condition, environmental responsibility, system security, economic prosperity, fostering participation and cooperation among stakeholders, and informed decision-making. So for the goals and strategies, these, as I said, kind of form the transportation vision for the region. The schedule for these right now, BMC staff are working on revising strategies with a focus on simplifying and combining strategies where possible, using plain language so that they're easily understandable, and integrating recommendations from the Transportation Needs Assessment Survey and focus groups, as well as the scenario planning projects where that makes sense. Also looking at prior public comments, and we've already tried to integrate those, but we can always improve our response to public comment with the next set of strategies. So pretty quickly, we'll have refined strategies for review by the technical committee in September, and hoping to launch the LRTP with a public comment period on the goals and strategies in mid-September through October, followed by reviewing, revising, and responding, and a resolution in December. So I noted that we would like to incorporate recommendations from the needs assessment, some examples of recommendations. These are kind of broad recommendations that have come from that. There are more specific recommendations as well, but some examples here. We want to ensure that goal areas are clearly differentiated in terms of goal language and associated strategies. So for example, sometimes the concepts of accessibility and mobility can be mixed, and I think some of the strategies were a little bit intermingled as a result sometimes. And so staff have really made an effort to look at that and kind of clearly differentiate the concepts. We also want to move towards strategies that are actionable and measurable. We want to consider benefits and burdens to lower opportunity areas across all goal areas. And we want to consider expanding the set of performance measures that we're tracking to reflect the revised strategies and scoring criteria. Are there areas that we're not tracking information that we should be? Financial forecast. So this is a loose time frame of this fall to winter of 2026. We still need to coordinate with MDOT on a schedule for a forecast through 2055. But MDOT does provide a forecast of anticipated federal and state revenues for the Baltimore region through 2055 in three broad categories of system preservation, operations, and expansion. Now we allocate for system preservation and operation needs first, and so whatever is left over is available for expansion funding. So most projects compete for that expansion pot of funding, which is, as I'll show in the next slide, kind of an ever dwindling pot of money. We also developed a tool in fiscal 2022 to estimate local revenues available for transportation to kind of provide a complete picture of revenues available, and we anticipate updating those numbers for the next LRTP. So this is a chart showing the split for operations, preservation, and expansion across the last 4 LRTPs. And, you know, we're really showing increasing system preservation needs and decreasing expansion funds. In terms of percent, system preservation has increased as a percentage of the LRTP from 21 to 30%. At the same time, expansion has decreased from 26% to 17% of available funds, with operations staying fairly consistent at just above 50-ish%. So, you know, that really just indicates that there's maybe some potentially difficult decisions ahead for expansion funding and which projects are prioritized. Looking at the project scoring methodology, we're anticipating minor updates in the fall of 2025. We did a fairly substantial methodology update for the last LRTP, Resilience 2050, but you know, we do want to incorporate comments that we received associated with the last LRTP. We want to incorporate some comments that we got associated with the most recent UPWP adoption, and integrate recommendations as feasible from the recent transportation needs assessment and scenario planning tasks. One significant update is the addition of a scoring methodology for standalone active transportation projects. This is a UPWP consultant-led project that we're just embarking on to explore integrating these projects more fully into the LRTP. They had previously been included as part of set-aside funding, but there has been a greater push to incorporate, you know, standalone bicycle and pedestrian projects alongside the roadway and transit projects in the preferred alternative. So we anticipate presenting that updated scoring methodology to the technical committee in December or January of 2026. There will be a steering committee that several of you will be hearing from me this week. That will help to guide that project. We're looking for members from every jurisdiction, and we're pulling that together this week, as I said. But you know, there's a lot that is involved with doing this. We want to discuss, you know, what types of standalone active transportation projects should be included. What level of investment do we want to dedicate to these projects? Does it make sense to have these standalone bicycle and pedestrian projects compete with these much larger scale transit and roadway projects? So there's some policy questions associated with the scoring methodology. Regardless, we anticipate a BRTB resolution in January or February of 2026 for the scoring methodology. This is just a reminder of the current scoring framework. You all, the project submitters, are responsible for the policy score. That's composed of how high of a priority the project is for the submitting jurisdiction, as well as whether or not it has demonstrated financial support for a max policy score of 40 points. And then there is a technical score that each project is scored by BMC staff based on criteria that are drawn from the LRTP goals. So safety, accessibility, mobility, environment, security, and economic prosperity. Transit projects are eligible for slightly more points, a max of 55 versus 50. That was due to public comments encouraging the BRTB to prioritize transit over roadway projects. So that all is followed by project submittal and scoring anticipated in April through June of 2026. BMC will provide a project submittal form and instructions ahead of time. Project scoring then will occur in June through October of 2026. We score the technical the projects on technical scoring criteria. As I mentioned, you all provide the policy score, and we develop the preferred alternative based on the total project score, as well as the total amount of money anticipated to be available for those projects. Of course, cost estimation is also a key to that. We need to know how much we anticipate projects to cost in year of expenditure dollars, and so we anticipate working on cost estimation with MDOT, MTA, and SHA right around when project submittal finishes in June of 2026. Socioeconomic forecast, also a key part of the LRTP. The Cooperative Forecasting Group, as I mentioned, is currently developing a forecast of households, population, and employment through 2055. They're currently developing that list, those forecasts through November-ish of this year. Then BMC staff review, and they use that data to develop model inputs that are then finalized, and we anticipate a BRTB resolution for the forecasts in May or June of 2026. Now, these forecasts are key inputs to the BMC travel demand model for horizon years such as 2035, 2045, 2055 that we conduct air quality analysis for. We also do a host of other analysis, including the potential effects of projects, and we also utilize the forecasts for project scoring. Now, in the scenario planning needs assessment project, you'll note that we looked at impacts on lower opportunity areas versus the region. And in the LRTP, we also conducted an analysis of impacts on access and mobility via transit and driving for different geographies. And so to be consistent with those projects, the needs assessment and the scenario planning, we're considering adopting lower opportunity areas as that geography that we look at to see if there are greater benefits and burdens for lower opportunity areas versus the region. As Hannah mentioned in the previous presentation on scenario planning, lower opportunity areas are determined by the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership Opportunity Map. It's a tool that utilizes 21 indicators to determine opportunity, and areas rated as low or very low on this metric were classified as lower opportunity areas. Finally, that LOA definition, sorry, excuse me, wouldn't have to be the only definition we could consider. We could look at, for example, areas with a higher share of low-income households. And I've included a map of both so we can compare. Now, we don't have a recommendation for you today. We'll come back with that, but I mean, the areas are fairly similar. But, you know, of course, there are some differences. So it's something for us to consider as we look at how we carry out that analysis of the preferred alternative. And that is all I have for you today. Happy to take any questions. I know that's kind of a broad brush summary of the schedule for the LRTP, and we'll keep you updated along the way.
Thank you, Zach. We'll now move on to other business. The next Tech Committee meeting will be virtual on Tuesday, September 2nd. And Todd has one last item for discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is going to be very brief. So today I just wanted to give you a preview of a resolution that's going to be coming before the Tech Committee and the board at September. This is the carryover resolution that normally happens at this period. So again, we adopt the planning budget or the work program in April. That becomes effective July 1st. And then after we close out the books in the September period, we come back and bring in any older projects that have not been completed in the prior fiscal year. But what I wanted to do is talk to the technical committee, and I'll be reaching out to the UPWP coordinators at the local jurisdictions about some of the local quarterly billing projects that are basically are close to being completed or have been closed basically in the previous fiscal years. And our recommendation is to allow final billing on these tasks in fiscal year 2026 Q1 invoicing. So basically, each jurisdiction would still be able to charge against these older projects up until September 30th of this year. But after that point, we would basically close those projects out since it's hard to kind of coordinate with those once they've already been closed. This includes a pretty short list. It includes one project from fiscal year 2022, the RTP Corridors Analysis Project, and 3 projects from the 2023 planning budget: the EV charging infrastructure expansion support, the RTP Lots Support Project, and then the Bikeable Baltimore Region project. So you'll see the total balances remaining for all of the jurisdictions. Again, there's been some charging at local jurisdictions. Some of them haven't touched any of these projects for a long time. So our auditors do like to close out these projects as we start getting final products. So with that, we'll close it out. This is just a preview for next month. And again, I'll be reaching out to your UPWP coordinator with this information. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much, and I am open for any questions. If not, I will turn it back to the chair.
Thanks, Todd. Is there any other business to come before the committee? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion and a second to close the meeting.
Let's move.
Baltimore City seconds.
Thank you. There is no need this month for a closed session, so enjoy the rest of your morning. Thank you guys for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.